Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Sadi Bet. We're in the middle of a long Agadah about Techiyat HaMetim and Olam Haba. We're going to start a bit of a tangent about the importance of teaching Torah, but this will link up back with the theme of Olam Haba in a few paragraphs. So we begin. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Kol hamoneh halacha mepi talmid kilu gozlo minachalat avotav shene'emar. Torah sivalanu Moshe morasha kilat Yaakov. Rav says, if anyone doesn't teach Torah to a student, if he knows a halacha and he withholds that halacha from the mouth of the student so that the student doesn't know it, it's as if he is robbing him of the inheritance of his ancestors, because a pasuk says Moshe commanded us the Torah, an inheritance of the congregation of Yaakov, and therefore, just like an inheritance you have to give to the rightful heirs, so to the Torah is an inheritance to the next generation, and a teacher who knows a halacha must teach it to the student. This is inheritance to all of Israel, all the way back from the time of creation, the idea being that the Torah even precedes creation, and so therefore one needs to teach it to them. Amar Rav Chana bar Bizna Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasida Kol hamoneh halacha mepi talmid afilu ubarin shebeme'imo mekalelin oto shene'emar monei bar yikebuhu le'om. And Rabbi Shimon Chasida echoes this idea, and he says anyone who withholds a halacha from a student, even the fetuses in the wombs of their mothers will curse that teacher. As the pasuk says in Mishle, he who withholds bar, we're going to say that bar is Torah, the people, or le'um, we're going to see is referring to a womb, will curse him. Le'om ela ubarin shne'emaru le'om mil'om ye'ematz. Le'om, which literally means a nation, but we see in Bereshit with Rivka, who is going to give birth to twins, and the oracle says le'om mile'om, that one nation will overcome the other, but is referring to the nations that are within her womb, so that's fetuses. Ve'en kabo ela kelala shene'emar ma'ekob lo kabo el ve'en bar ela Torah shene'emar nashiku bar penye enaf. And the word kabo means to curse. It actually does mean that, but there's going to be another interpretation coming up right now. As it says, how can I curse regarding Bilam, one who is not cursed by God? And bar means Torah, as we see in Mizmor Bet, pay homage to bar lest he be angry, and so this is understood here as referring to Torah. Ula bar Yishmael omer menakebin oto kich bara. Ula says that a teacher who withholds a halacha from a student, he deserves a punishment that he should be perforated like a sieve. Here's a sieve. Ketib hacha yikebuhu le'om uchtivatam vayikob hor bedarto v'amar Abaye ki uchla de kasre. Because in the pasuk that we just quoted, we said that the people should yikebuhu, and although before we said that means to curse him, another interpretation based on Melachim is he bored a hole in its lid. And it says vayikov, so that means to make a hole. And Abaye says to make a lot of holes, like a launderer's utensil, launderers that want to sprinkle whatever scented things or soap or whatever water on the clothing would use a sieve like this. And so a person who doesn't, maybe it's midah keneged midah, if he doesn't give over and teach all of his Torah to the student, but rather only pieces and leaves other things out, so then he should be perforated and have holes like his teaching had holes in it. And the other side, if a teacher does teach all the halachot that he knows to his students, what should be his reward? He deserves the blessings like Yosef, shenemar, ubracha לראש משביר ואין משביר אלא יוסף שנאמר ויוסף הוא השליט על הארץ הוא המשביר לכל עם הארץ. These words ubracha לראש משביר are a continuation of the pasuk that we started before, monei abar yikebuhu le'om, and so that's if someone does not teach the student, and so if he does teach, then beracha, blessing to the head of the mashbir. Well, who is the mashbir? We know from Bereshit that Yosef, it says he is in charge of the land and he's the provider to all the people of the land a provider of food. And so therefore, whoever does teach his students will be blessed like Hamashpir, like Yosef. אמר רב ששת, כל המלמד תורה בעולם הזה זוכה למדה לעולם הבא, שנאמר ומרווה גם הוא יורה. Rav Sheshet says anyone who teaches Torah in this world will have the merit that he will be able to teach also in the world to come. What could be better than a blessing that to be able to continue teaching Torah forever? As it says, umarveh, and we're reading this as if you switch around the resh and the vav. Umoreh, and the teacher, he will also teach in the future, hu yoreh. And so he merits olam haba. So that's how we went on this tangent about teaching Torah, because we knew we were going to land here, back onto the theme of olam haba. Amar Rava, minayin l'tchetem etim min haTorah. Back to the question of how do we know about tchetem etim in the Torah? Shenemar yichidu ben ve'al yamot yichidu ben ba'olam hazeh ve'al yamot olam haba. The blessing to the Reuven by Moshe and Vezot HaBeracha is let the Reuven live and let them not die. That's kind of repetitive. If they live, then doesn't that mean they're not going to die? So it means that they should live in this world and that they not die in the world to come. Ravina Amar Mehacha V'Rabbi Miyeshenei Admat Afar Yakisu Ela Lechaye Olam Ve'ela Lecharafot Diraon Olam. Finally, we actually have the pasuk in Daniel, which is the most explicit reference to Techiyat Emetim, where Daniel says, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awaken, some to everlasting life and some to reproaches and everlasting disgrace. Techiyat Emetim is not necessarily good. It depends on how someone lived. Some will be resurrected for punishment, others for blessing, for reward. Rav Ashi Amar Mehacha V'ata Lech Lekes V'tanuach V'tamod Legoralcha Lekes Hayamin. Or from the very next pasuk in Daniel that says, but you Daniel, you go, but go you your way until the end be, and you shall rest and arise to your lot at the end of days. So those are pretty clear references, proofs for Techiyat Emetim in the Tanakh. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Kol parnas shemanhig et hasibur benachat, zocher manhigam la'olam haba, shneimar ki merachamav yenahagem, v'hamabo'eh mayim yenahalem. Rabbi Elazar says, any leader of a community that leads calmly, with patience, with respect to the people, not yelling them and getting angry at them, if he's a good leader, then he will merit and continue to be a leader of the people even in the world to come. As the pasuk says in Yeshaya, he that has compassion upon them and will lead them even by the springs of water, he shall guide them. So merachamam, if you care about, if you love the people that you're leading, then you will merit to lead them even into the world to come. Amar Rabbi Elazar, gedola de'ah shenitena ben shetei otiyot shne'emar ki el de'ot Adonai. Rabbi Elazar, continuing other statements of Rabbi Elazar, great is knowledge, because look how knowledge is placed between two names of God. In this pasuk, you have the word De'ot, right before it is El, and right after it is Hashem. So you see, De'ot is surrounded by Hashem, and that shows how great it is. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, Gadol mikdash shenitan ben shete otiyot shneimar, Palta Adonai mikedash Adonai konenu yadecha. Great is the mikdash, is the bet HaMikdash, that also is between two names of Hashem, Mikdash in the middle, Hashem right before, and Hashem right after. Matkif la Rav Ada kar Ela me'ata gedola nekama shenitena ben shete otiyot tichtib el nekamot Adonai el nekamot Tofia. Well, according to that, any word that's between two names of God is great, but so is vengeance, is between the two names of Hashem, El here and Hashem right after. So you're going to say that vengeance is great. Should we extol the praise of vengeance? Amar lemilete hachiname kedeola damar ula shete hofa'iyot halalu lama achat midat toba v'achat midat puranut. And Beelzebub answers, says yes. Look at that context, and in fact, it is great. Because it's not good for people to take vengeance, as a prohibition of taking vengeance against other people. But when Hashem takes vengeance, then it's good in two ways, and we need both. Pasuk says El Nekamot, and again El Nekamot Tofiyah. One is for good, one is for bad. When Hashem crushes the enemies, then that's good for Israel, and also it's bad for the enemies. So it's actually a double positive. So when Hashem takes vengeance, vengeance, then it's good. But we should not take vengeance against our neighbors if they didn't lend us something, and you go, oh, you didn't do that to me, I'm going to do that to you also. So we should not take that trait against neighbors. But when Hashem does it against enemies, then that is a good thing. So yes, nekama is in fact great in that context. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, kol adam sheyesh bo de'ah ki'ilu nibna bet hamikdash biyamav, sheze nitan ben shetei otiyot v'ze nitan ben shetei otiyot. Rabbi Elazar says anyone who has knowledge, it's as if the Bet HaMikdash was built in his day, because both of these words, as we saw above, De'ah and Mikdash, are written between two names of God. So we learned before that both of them are great, but we learned also now that they are actually equivalent to each other. So if you're mourning the Bet HaMikdash and really wish you have a Bet HaMikdash and you don't have one right now, don't worry. Go and learn wisdom, and that will be an equivalent achievement. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, kol adam sheyesh bo de'ah lasof mit'asher shenemar ubdat chadarim yimal'u kol hon yakar v'na'im. A person who has knowledge, who has wisdom, will become wealthy, as the pasuk says in Mishlei. By knowledge are the chambers filled with precious and pleasant riches. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, kol adam she'en bo de'ah asur l'rachem alav shenemar ki lo am binot hu al ken lo yirachamenu osehu ve'yosro lo yehonenu. Any person who does not have knowledge, an ignoramus person, a person who, especially on purpose, they don't care about having, they don't want knowledge, then you should not have mercy on that person. As Yeshaya says, it's a people of no understanding, therefore its maker will have no mercy on them. Its creator will show them no favor. If they have no understanding of good and bad and right and wrong, then these are not good people, and one should not have mercy on bad people. And furthermore, don't even help them. Anyone who gives bread to someone who has no knowledge, suffering will come upon that person who gives them bread. Shenemar lachmecha yasimu mazor tachtecha en tibuna bo ven mazor ela yisurin shenemar vayad Ephraim et cholyo v'Yehuda et mezoro. This pasuk in Obadiah says, they who eat your bread will place mazor. We'll see what that means, under him in whom there is no discernment. Mazor means affliction. As we say in Hosea, Ephraim saw his sickness, and parallel to sickness is Yehuda, his wound, mezoro. So therefore we see that mazor means a wound, and so lachmecha, if you take your bread and you give it to someone who has no knowledge, then affliction will come to the person, because the person you gave it to has no tivuna, has no understanding. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, all these are statements of Rabbi Elazar, that's what they have in common. L'kol ha'adam she'en bo de'ah lasof golesh, shenemar lachen gala ami mebeli da'at. Someone who has no knowledge, and then will go into exile. As Yeshaya says, my people are exiled because they have no knowledge. And again, this is knowledge not of the Pythagorean theorem. This is knowledge of what the right thing to do. And without knowledge of what's good and bad, then one will make bad choices. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, kol bayit she'en divrei Torah nishma'im bo balayla esh ochalto. If you have a house where words of Torah are not heard in them at night, then fire will consume it. Shene'emar, kol choshech tamun lisfunav te'ochlehu esh lo nupach yera sarid be'aholo. En sarid ela tamid chacham. Shene'emar, uba seridim asher Hashem koreh. The pasuk says, all darkness is laid up for his treasures. A fire not fanned shall consume him, meaning a great fire that doesn't even need fanning. It shall go ill with a sarid in his tent. What's sarid? It's a tamid chacham. As Yoel says, among the siridim, those who Hashem shall call. So if Hashem is calling them, so they must be good people. So that's a sarid. So if there's no sarid in the house, then it will be consumed by fire. Someone who does not give benefit to Talmidei Chachamim from his property, help them out so they can go and learn Torah better, will not see blessing in his own property. Shene'emar, en sarid le'ochlo al ken lo yachil tubo. As pasuk in the Yom says, none of his food shall remain. Now, therefore, his prosperity shall not endure. We're taking sarid here again as referring to Tamid Chacham. If he doesn't give any of his food to a sarid, to a Chacham, then he will not have prosperity in his own property. En sarid el Tamid Chachamim shenemaru basiridim asher Hashem koreh. We quote the same pasuk over here. to prove that Sarid means Tamid Chacham. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, Kol sheno meshayed pata shulchano, eno ro'eh siman beracha le'olam, shenemar, en Sarid le'ochlo, al ken lo yachil tubo. And now another statement based on the same pasuk, but now we're taking Sarid in its literal pishat, remains and leftover. Rabbi Elazar says, anyone who does not leave some bread over on his table after you finish eating, don't lick up every last crumb, but rather leave some extra as a sign of blessing to say, thank you Hashem, look how you gave me so much, more than I need. So leave a little bit over. Some say leave a little bit over in case a poor person comes, so that you always have some bread to give to a poor person. So if one does not leave that, then he will not see blessing forever. As the pasuk says, none of his food shall remain, meaning if you don't leave any food left over, then his prosperity shall not endure. V'hamar Rabbi Elazar, kol mesher petitim al shulchano kilo obed avodah zara shenem harochim lagad shulchan ve'ham maleim lamni mimsach. Hold on, Rabbi Elazar said the opposite thing. Anyone who leaves crumbs, little pieces of bread on this table, it's like worshipping idols, as the pasuk says, who prepare a table for God, for fortune, and or for blended wine for destiny. It looks like he's leaving over bread for some divine being. It's idolatrous sacrifice. Why are you leaving pieces of bread on your table? This is not a good thing to do. So which one is it? And the answer is la kashya. Hadi kashelema behadeh, hadele kashelema bahadeh. It depends if there is a whole loaf with it or not a whole loaf with it. So in other words, if you have just some small pieces of bread on the table, then leave them. That's a sign of blessing. Thank you Hashem, and you left and you even have leftovers, and so we have more than enough. That's okay. But you shouldn't bring a whole loaf and add to it, because then it's like, what do you need a whole loaf for? That looks like it's an offering to some avodah zarah. So as long as you have some crumbs there, just leave the crumbs and don't bring an entire whole loaf. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, kol ha'machalif bediburo kilo obed avodah zarah ketib hacha v'hiti be'anav kimtateh uchtivatam hebel hema maaseh ta'atuim. Rabbi Elazar further says, anyone who changes his words, meaning that he lies, he replaces truth with falsehood. It's like he's worshipping idolatry. As it says regarding Yaakov stealing the blessing from Esav, it says, I'm going to go to my father and make believe I'm Esav. I will seem to him like a deceiver. So we see that the word mitateya means to deceive. And it says in Yirmiyah, in the context of idol worship, hebel, hema, these are vanity, they're works of deception. So just like idolatry is deception, so too anyone who deceives even other people is engaged in something that's like idolatry. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, kol hamistakel ba'erva kashto nin ayret shneimar, eria te'or kashtecha. Rabbi Elazar says, anyone who looks at nakedness, his bow is emptied, meaning he won't have potency. As it says, your bow is stripped bare, so eria, it sounds like erva. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, l'olam heveh kabel v'kayam. Amar Rabbi Zera, af anana metenena bait afel en potchin lo chalonot lirot nig'o shema'mina. Rabbi Elazar says you should always be in the dark, meaning be anonymous, lay low. Don't draw attention to yourself. Do good things, but you don't have to get credit for everything. And Rabbi Zera says, I also have a braita that teaches the similar idea, that in a dark house, one does not open the windows to illuminate, to see if there's a nega. If you have a house that may have a leprous spot on it, so leave the windows closed, rather not see it. Once you see it, then you know, oh, this is a bait minuga, everything is tameh. But as long as you don't see it and the Kohen doesn't come and declare it to be tameh, so it's not tameh. So it's important not to show off and reveal things, because the likelihood is then people will come and inspect and they'll find, oh, well, you're not 100%, you have this wrong and that wrong. Better to be humble and lay low. And so this is a good proof for what Rabbi Elazar taught.
Amar Rabbi Tavi, Amar Rabbi Yoshia, מה דכתיב שאול ועושר רחם ארס לא שבעה מים, וכי מה עניין שאול עשר רחם, אלא לומר לך מה רחם מכניס ומוציא, אף שאול מכניס ומוציא. Rabbi Tavi says, in the name of Rabbi Yoshia, a question, what does this pasuk in Mishleh mean? That there are three that are never satisfied: the grave, a barren womb, and earth that does
does not receive sufficient water. The simple reading is at a grave, people always die. The grave is never satisfied that there's enough people that died. Okay, had enough. They always wants more people to die and go into the grave. A woman who is barren never stops wanting to have children and gives up, but she's always wants to have children. And earth that's parched, that doesn't receive enough water, always wants more and more water. The question is, why are these three things here together? What does a grave and a womb have in common? A womb brings in and spits out, meaning it takes in seed, develops a child, and then gives birth to a child. So too, Sheol, a grave, brings in a dead body, and eventually will give forth a live body similar to a womb. And so this is a proof for Techiyat HaMetim. Havahalo devrim kal v'chomer, u'ma rechem shemachnisin bo b'chashai, mosim menu b'kolei kolot, shel shemachnisin bo b'kolot, en odin shemosim menu b'kolei kolot, mikat teshuvah lomrim en Techiyat HaMetim min haTorah. And in fact, it's not just similar, it's even a kal v'chomer. If a womb where one puts into it in hiding, meaning when a husband and the wife have intercourse, so that's in hiding, and the seed goes into her. But when she gives birth, it's with shouts and screaming. So if that's true, all the more so, when someone dies, then it's with lots of shouts and screaming and wailing. They would have the professional wailers that would make a lot of noise. So if that's true, then all the more so, when the dead are resurrected, then it will be with shouts of joy and singing. And from this, we have a response to those who claim that there is no Techiyat HaMetim in the Torah. Tana de Eliyahu, Sadikim Shatid HaKadosh Baruch Hu lehachayotan, enan chozrin la'afaran, shenemar, ve'anisha b'Sion, ve'nota b'Yerushalayim, kadosh yamer lo, kol ha'katub l'chayim b'Yerushalayim, kadosh la'olam kayam afhem, le'olam kayamin. A baraita from the school of Eliyahu. The righteous in the future that Hashem will raise up and give life to, they will not die again and go back to dust. They will live forever. As the pasuk in Yeshaya says, come to pass that those who remain in Sion and he remains in Jerusalem shall be called kadosh, holy, anyone who's written in unto life in Jerusalem. And so this kadosh, the word kadosh here, we make a comparison. Just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just like Hashem lives forever, so too these people that will merit to be revived will live forever. And if you ask, what about those years when Hashem will renew the world? As the pasuk says, that Hashem will alone be exalted on that day. This is based on a different midrash that the world is going to exist for 6,000 years of history, and then the seventh thousand year is going to be rest, times of Mashiach. But after that, Hashem is going to destroy everything, destroy the world altogether, and renew it. And we learn this from the pasuk that on that day, Hashem alone will exist, meaning, and nothing else will exist. So you just said that the righteous who are resurrected will never die. But what about after that 7,000th year? Where will they go? And the answer is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu oseh lahen kedafayim kanesharim v'shatin al panei hamayim shenemar al ken lo nira behamir aretz b'moat harim beleb yamim. Hashem will give them wings, and they will be able to fly over the surface of the water. And there's still going to be stuff that Hashem's just going to, bring the waters back together and recreate it. So they'll be able to hover and fly over it. As Pasuk in Tilim says, therefore, we will not fear when God changes the land and when the mountains are moved in the midst of the sea. Even though the land will change and the mountains will change and all that, we will not fear because we'll be able to fly overhead. I wonder if the creators of WALL-E had this in mind when the spaceship goes up into space with the remnants, with those that will be saved while the earth is destroyed and has a chance to renew itself. Lahavdil, but it could be that they base themselves on this midrash, who knows. V'shema tomar yesh lahem sa'ar, tamud lomar v'koveh Hashem yachalifu choach yalu eber kanesharim, yarusu v'lo yigao yelchu v'lo yi'afu. And maybe you'll say, aren't they going to get tired out and have to suffer, but you have to fly for so long? So don't worry about that. Yeshaya says, but they who wait for Hashem shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run, not be weary. They shall walk and not tire. So they will be okay, and they will last through that long period of, it could be 1,000 years, before the world is renewed. Now, why are you learning from these Pesukim here that the dead that will arise will remain alive forever? Why not learn the opposite conclusion from the dry bones that Yechezkel brings back to life, and seemingly they die again? So we can learn from there that they will be revived, but they will die again. No, this Baraita that we're quoting is of Tanit Eliyahu, agrees with the opinion that the dry bones that Yechezkel brought up was actually a parable. He saw this in a prophetic dream. There weren't actually bones that came back to life and sang to Hashem, but rather this was all in a dream, and it was a parable. The dry bones represented Bnei Israel, as it says right after in that very chapter, represented Bnei Israel that lost hope in exile, said, forget it, we're dry, we're never going to be redeemed. And Hashem tells Yechezkel, go tell them that they're going to have a chance, they're going to be redeemed, they're going to come back to Israel, and so on. So all this was a parable to the actual people, on a national level, that they were dried out. And at a national level, they will be revived and brought back to Israel. So if this was only a parable and didn't actually happen, that's why we can't learn from it for what will actually happen in Techiyat HaMetim. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Metim Shechei Yechezkel Amdu Al Ragleihem, V'amru Shira V'ametu. Ma Shira Amru, Adonai Memit B'Sedek U'Mchayeh B'Rachamim. And we see that there was actually a machloket about whether the dry bones of Yechezkel happened in reality or not. And the following to Rabbi Eliezer says that the dead people that Yechezkel brought back to life, they stood on their feet and they sang, and then they died again. And what did they sing? Oh, they sang, Hashem kills people with justice, they deserved it, but they give life with mercy. And so that's an appropriate song. Rabbi Yoshua says no. They read from Tefilat Hana, who says God kills and gives life. He lowers to the grave and he elevates. Also a very appropriate song to sing. But anyway, this is from the idea from which we assumed before that they died again. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Emet Mashal Haya. Rabbi Yehuda, however, disagrees with the previous two opinions and says that they didn't actually live. All this was a parable. Now, what does he mean, Emet? It was truth, it was a parable. Amar lo Rabbi Nechemia, Im Emet, lama mashal, im mashal, lama Emet. Why does he say it's truth, but then it's a parable? If it's either it's truth, meaning it really happened, or it's a parable that it didn't really happen. So what does it mean, emet mashal? Ela be'emet mashal haya. What he means is, in truth, it was a parable. It's a true parable. It's a very important thing that we learn. Just because something didn't happen literally doesn't mean it's not important and it's not true. It's true that it's a parable, and therefore the message that it represents will come true. Rabbi Eliezer beno shel Rabbi Yosef HaGalili Omer, metim shechei Yechezkel alu Eretz Yisrael v'nasu nashim v'holidu banim u'banot. Yet another opinion, Rabbi Eliezer says, the son of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili says, that the dry bones, the deceased that Yechezkel brought back to life, they lived, they didn't die right away, like the other opinions say, and it was not a mashal, like Rabbi Yehuda says. Rather, they lived, and they continued to live, and they made aliyah to Israel, and they married women, and they had children. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteral Ragav Amar Ani mebnei benehem v'halalu tefillin sheniach li abi abba mehem. And in fact, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteral got up, and he said, I am a descendant of those people, and here is the tefillin that my great-grandfather left me. It was from them. So you see, they lived, they wore tefillin, eventually they died, but they lived nice long lives. Now, who were these dry bones? Who did they belong to? Why did they die in the first place? If you see a field, a valley full of dry bones, that's not a normal way of burial. That suggests that they died in some mass attack or a war, right? So who were these people that deserved to die in such a traumatic way?
way. Amarav elu bnei Ephraim shemanu laches v'ta'u shene'emar ubnei Ephraim shutalach ubered beno v'tachat beno v'elada beno v'tachat beno v'zabad beno v'shutelach beno v'ezer v'elad v'haragum anshe gat hanoladim ba'aretz v'gomer uchtiv v'yitabel Ephraim abihem yamim rabim v'yabo echav le'nachamo. Rav says these were the children of Ephraim who were counting the years until the slavery in Egypt would be over, but they miscalculated and they thought, okay, it's over, it's time to go. And somehow they were able to get out of Egypt and they went through the land of the Pilishtim to make Aliyah. However, they were killed on the way, as we see in these Pesukim in Divrei Yamim, and it lists the Bnei Ephraim and it gives a list of all of their names, but it says that the people of Gat who were born in the land slew them. And it says in the next pasuk that Ephraim, their father, mourned for them many days because they all died. So we see that these are Bnei Ephraim, although they had good intentions to make Aliyah, but they made a miscalculation. And so because they died in this big battle, terrible battle, they were all laid in a mass grave, and those are the very people that Yechezkel brought back to life, which I guess is nice because they really wanted to make Aliyah, but they had this terrible tragedy on the way. By the way, this explains why eventually Bnei Israel go around, they don't go straight into the land of Pilishtim. That was dangerous. Bnei Ephraim already died there, so they go a roundabout way, so they don't have to confront this terrible enemy immediately. Ushmuel amar elu bnei Adam shekafru b'techat hametim shenemar v'yomer elai ben Adam asamot ele kol bet Yisrael hema hine omerim yahabeshu asmotenu v'abatik batenu nigzarnu lanu. Shemuel says these are people who denied the resurrection of the dead. As the pasuk says, then he said to me, son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say our bones are dried up, our hope is lost, we are cut off. Meaning that they're saying that we cannot be resurrected because our bones are all dry. It's impossible. So Hashem says, go resurrect them just to show them, see, you're wrong. You didn't believe in resurrection. Now I'm going to resurrect you and then kill you again. And that way you learn your lesson. For next time, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar, Elu bnei Adam she'en bahen lachluchit shel mitzvah, shneimar asamot hayibeshot shim'u debar Hashem. Rabbi Abba says that these are people that have not even a little bit of a mitzvah on them. As it says, these bones are dry. Dry, what do you mean dry? Literally, it means that they've been dead for a long time. They're all dried out. But in this midrashic reading, it means they're dry, meaning they have no merits, no mitzvot at all. Rabbi Yitzchak אמר, אלו בני אדם שחיפו את ההיכל כולו שכסים ורמסים שנאמר, ובו ועראה והנה כל תבנית רמס ובהמה שקס וכל גילולי בית ישראל מחוקה על קיר סביב וכתיב התם וברני עליהם סביב סביב. Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha says these are people who covered the sanctuary with repugnant creatures, creepy crawlies. As it says in Yechezkel, Yechezkel came and he saw what was going on in the Bet HaMikdash and every form of creeping animal and repugnant animal, all kinds of idols and things that they brought in all around. These are snakes and serpents and things that represent all kinds of idolatrous gods that they believed in. And it says in Yechezkel 37 that he took them all the way round and round. So you see, he says the same word, Saviv here and Saviv here, so that connects the two. So these are all people that worshipped idolatry. That's why they were killed in this terrible mass death. Rabbi Yochanan amar elu metim shebebiga'at dura. Rabbi Yochanan says that the dead that Yechezkel revived were the people that were killed in the Dura valley. This is referring to this pasuk here that Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, a huge image of himself, and he set it up in the valley of Dura in Bavel. Now it doesn't say anything here about people that were killed in this valley, but the rest of this chapter will be the subject of this story. And the story goes on to say that he got together all of his officials, the satraps, prefect, governors, and so on, 8 different groups of people, rules of province, to come and see the image. And at the appropriate time, they all were supposed to bow down to the image. We said, when you hear the horn, the pipe, and so on, everybody has to bow down. And everybody did bow down except for Daniel and his 3 friends. And then they got in trouble for that. Someone told on them and said, Daniel,
Daniel's 3 friends did not bow down. And the king got very angry and threw them into a fiery pit. But miraculously, they survived. And so we're going to talk about the continuation of this story. But first, we have to explain what was going on here. That there were bones of dead people in this valley that Yechezkel revived. ואמר רבי יוחנן, מנהר אשל על רבת בקעת דורה, שבשעה שהגלה נבוכדנצר הרשע את ישראל, היו בהם בחורים שהיו מגנין את החמה ביופיין, והיו כסתיות רואות אותן ושופעות זבות. אמרו לבעליהן, ובעליהן למלך, ציווה המלך והרגום, ועדיין היו שופעות זבות. ציווה המלך ור מסום. Rabbi Yochanan says that these dead bodies took up the entire Dura Valley all the way from Eshel River to Rabat. And what were they doing there? Who were they? At the time that Nebuchadnezzar sent the Jewish people into exile, there were among the Jewish people who were walking into exile these young men who were so beautiful that they overshadowed the sun with their beauty. And the Kasti women who saw them their blood would flow as zavot, and they couldn't stop it because they were so attracted to these beautiful young men. And then these women told their husbands, and their husbands were all angry. They're jealous. What's going on? Who are these beautiful, handsome young men? We don't want them around anymore. And so the husbands told the king, and the king said, okay, we should kill them all. And even though they were dead, they still were so handsome and beautiful that the women couldn't get over them, and they were still flowing with as zavot. And so the king said, all right, the only next thing we have to do is trample them and destroy their remains so that they will no longer be visible. Those are the remains that Yechezkel revived. תנו רבנן, בשעה שהפיל נבוכדנצר הרשע את חנניה מישה ועזריה לכבשן האש, אמר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא ליחזקאל, לך וחיי מתים בבקעת דורה. And now a follow-up to that story. At the time when Nebuchadnezzar, the evil one, threw Daniel's 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, into the fiery furnace because they refused to bow down to the idol, Hashem told Yechezkel, go and revive the dead in the valley of Dura. כיוון שהחיה אותן בעצמות וטפחו לו לאותו רשע על פניו. And as soon as they were revived, they came and they slapped Nebuchadnezzar on his face. אמר מה טיבן של אלו. So as Nebuchadnezzar is getting slapped around, he says, what's going on? Who are these people slapping me around? אמרו לו, חבריהן של אלו מחיי מתים בבקעת דורה. And his advisors told him, the friend of these, meaning of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, talking about Hashem revived the dead that you had killed in Bigat Dura. פתח ואמר, עתוי כמה רברבין ותימוהי כמה תקיפין מלכותי מלכות עולם ושרתנה עם דר ודר. And so Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed that he began singing, and in fact that's how the chapter ends, with those very words. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. A beautiful song that that Nebuchadnezzar then said. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Yusak zahab rotech לתוך פיו של אותו רשע, שאלמלא לא בא מלאך וסתרו על פיו, ביקש לגנות כל שירות ותשבחות שאמר דוד בספר תהילים. Rabbi Yitzchak says that molten gold should be poured in the mouth of that wicked person to stop up him from singing any further. Interesting, molten gold. This is a terrible punishment. But because he's a king, he should get a punishment fit for a king. So we're not going to use, molten cheap metal, molten gold for a king to be poured into his mouth so that he should not be singing anymore. Happens to be there is a report of a Roman general who was taken captive by Persia, and he was executed by having molten gold poured down his throat. So the rabbis might be referring to an actual story that they know. Anyway, why should we stop up his mouth? Because if not that the angel came and stopped him, struck him on his mouth and stopped him from praising, he would overshadow all the songs and praises that David said in Tehillim. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar, his poetry was so beautiful and so heartfelt that it could, if he kept going, we have just one verse and it's a beautiful verse. If he kept going, then it would have been even greater than Sefer Tehillim. So we had to stop him. Tenor Banan, Shisha Nisim Nasu Beoto Hayom. There were 6 miracles that happened on that day when the 3 friends were saved from the furnace. Ve'elohen Saf HaKibshan. Number 1, it rose from where it was all the way underground furnace, and it rose up so that everybody could witness the miracle. V'nifras HaKibshan. And the wall was breached of limestone. Humak Sodov Nepach Selem Al Panav. V'nisrefu Arba Malchiot. V'chiei Chizkel Temetim Bebigat Dura. So the furnace was breached so everybody could see in. The limestone dissipated, even though it was very strong, so like a window, so everybody could see that even though they were thrown into the fire, everybody was able to see that they lived. The graven image, the idol that Nebuchadnezzar set up, was destroyed, and the 4 ranks of officials from the king who stood around the furnace were burned. And on that day also, Yechezkel revived the dead of Dura. So the 4 we're going to explain now. Now all these are from a tradition, except for the idea of the 4 groups of kingly officials who were killed while they were watching. Dichtiv Nebuchadnezzar malka shelach lemichnash leachashdar penaya signaya ufachavata adar gaz raya gedab raya detab raya Tiftaye v'chol shiltone medinata v'gomer. It says in the second pasuk in that chapter that Nebuchadnezzar gathered this 8 different groups of people that they all have to come and bow down to the idol. So you have all these people there. But then later on in the chapter, Uchti Vitai Gubrin Yehudain, then these certain Jews were there and they would not worship. Uchtiv Umid Kaneshin Achash Dar Penaya Signaya Ufachavata Vehad Malka Chazyan Legubraya Ile. And so it says later on, towards the end of the chapter, that only 4 of these groups of high up officials survived to witness what happened. It says here, this brings the 4 groups, saw the men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, nor their mantles damaged, nor had the smell of fire passed over them, or even their clothing was not damaged, and didn't even smell like smoke. And you see here that only 4 are mentioned. So at first 8 are mentioned, and then only 4 groups are mentioned. Apparently, the other 4 were burnt in fire. Taneh deber bi Eliezer ben Yaakov, afilu b'shat hasakana lo yishane adam את עצמו מן הרבנות שלו, שנאמר, בדין גובריה אילן, כפיתו בשר בעלי הון, פשטי הון, וחרבלת הון. And as a side point, we have a tradition from the school of Eliezer, who teaches even in a time of danger, a person should not change from his prominence. If he's an important person, even if he's about to be punished or killed or tried, he should still wear his distinguished clothing, as it says regarding Daniel's friends. These men were bound in their mantles, their tunics, their hats. They still wore their official garments, even as they were being thrown in the fire. And that's to show that one should always hold his dignity and his honor intact. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Gedolim Sadikim Yotem Malachei Hasharet, Shneimar, Ane v'amar ha'ana chazeh gubrin arba'a, sherayin mahlechin, begonu rav chabal la'itai behon, ve'reve hedi rebi'a'a, dameh lebar elahin. And further, Rabbi Yochanan teaches that the righteous are even greater than the angels. As it says late in that chapter, he says, what did you see? I saw 4 men unbound walking in the middle of the fire, and they had nothing, they weren't hurt. The appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. So he mentions they saw the 3 people, and they're walking around like regular people, and only after this is, and also there was a 4th that looked like an angel. So we see that the righteous are greater than even the angels, because they are mentioned first in this pasuk. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.